Video games are an incredibly complex piece of media, especially modern video games. So much goes into making them. You gotta come up with ideas, create good visuals, master the level design, write compositions, make sure the writing's good. Even the best games of all time make a few mistakes here and there. But there's one game out there that satisfies all my gaming needs, and that's Ori and the Will of the Wisps, an indie metroidvania by Moon Studios and a sequel to the first game, Ori and the Blind Forest. Admittedly, this game is not perfect. There's a few issues here and there, just like there is with every game. The combat is a little clunky, and the game does have frame rate issues on certain platforms. That's all I can think of for the moment, though. Here's the thing about this game. Ori and the Will of the Wisps excels in the art category. The game has amazing visuals, a breathtaking orchestrated soundtrack, and a story that could make a grown man cry. And in this video, I'll be talking about everything I love about Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Real quick before we begin, YouTube tells me only around 3% of my viewers are actually subscribed, so if you enjoyed this video, you get the idea. Also, join the Discord if you're interested. And now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Let's start this video off with something you'll notice right away. This game's visuals are seriously fantastic. It's one of the most beautiful art styles in the gaming industry. It's just nature. It's nature at its best. I swear this game makes any environment look stunning. Even areas you wouldn't think would be beautiful, like a swamp, are just amazing to look at. In fact, the graphics are the whole reason I initially picked up the game. I had never heard of the game before. I didn't even know what the hell an Ori was. All I knew was the game looked special from an artistic standpoint. Even the Switch version is breathtaking. How did they do it? Now, yes, I did mention the game isn't optimized perfectly and will have occasional FPS moments, especially the Switch version, but it doesn't take away from how beautiful the game is. Moving on, let's talk about the game's controls and how perfect they are. Whether you're playing on keyboard or controller, there is never a point in this game where you don't feel in control. It's not like Castlevania, where half the game's challenge is due to barely being able to move. In this Metroidvania, you feel like you can do anything. Ori's moveset just gets better and better the deeper you get through the game. I mean, that's kinda how Metroidvanias work after all. Anyway, controls isn't something I can talk about forever, but you know what is? Let's talk about the level design. We just talked about how this game controls just how you'd want it to, so naturally the game's level design is phenomenal as well. This game is a Metroidvania, but it's definitely more focused on platforming as opposed to other games in its genre. The game does attempt to improve the combat compared to the first game, and the game also adds boss fights, which we'll talk about later. But overall, the game knows what it's best at, platforming. Each area utilizes the new abilities that correspond with that part of the game. That way the game doesn't feel repetitive. There is one area of the game that a lot of people probably won't like, and it's the Moldwood Depths. Like the name suggests, this place is really dark, which opens the door to some confusion and frustrating deaths. Just hang in there though, because it's after this area where the game just keeps getting better and better. As someone who's played through the game multiple times and have mastered the ins and outs of this place, I find it to be quite decent, but for a new player, I could see it being annoying. Also, if you're going to attempt the underwater sections of this game, please just buy the infinite oxygen upgrade. Your life will be infinitely easier. As long as you do that, even the underwater portions of this game are fun. Now that's what I call impressive. Probably the best parts of the game are the escape levels, which are so great that we'll be talking about them in a separate category. Bottom line is, the level design is awesome, but we still have a lot more things to go over today. This next topic is a strange one. We're going to be talking about length. This game is not very long. In fact, there's an achievement requiring you to beat the game in under 4 hours. I think when I first played the game, it took me around 12 hours, but keep in mind, I'm a completionist by nature. That doesn't mean I'm going to hold on to your charity money though, don't worry. Anyway, back to Ori and the Will of the Wisps. I really appreciate the length of this game. In a world where we have games that'll zap 300 hours from you at an instant, it's refreshing to sit down and play a game that respects your time a little better. No disrespect to any other games, I just appreciate how this game doesn't try to stretch itself. Not every modern video game has to be a million hours long. So we just established that this game isn't very long. However, the game does feature a good amount of side quests and other forms of side content to check out. For example, there's combat trials, speedrunning trials, there's a wide variety of weapons and other items to consider. There's also achievements, obviously. Things like beating the game without dying, beating a certain boss without getting hit. Oh, and there's also this one side quest where you run around trading items with a bunch of people, sort of like in Link's Awakening. It's a pretty nice amount of side content for a game this size. It's big enough to keep the player entertained, yet doesn't overstay its welcome. I never got bored of the side content in this game because it was just as entertaining as the rest of it. Sometimes video games turn me off when there's just an overwhelming amount of side content to complete. I like that I was able to 100% this game and get every single achievement in less than 50 hours. It was fun, rewarding, and it never felt like a hassle. Moving on, it's time to talk about the boss fights. Real quick, just a warning, there are heavy spoilers in this segment, so if you're looking to go in blind, I'd recommend skipping. The first game, The Blind Forest, didn't have traditional boss fights, which is fine, not every game needs them. That game was still awesome, but I do love the boss fights that were added in the sequel. They're not gonna absolutely blow you away like, say for example, Hollow Knight's boss fights, but they're all solid and polished fights, just pure entertainment. The boss fights include Howl, Hornbeetle, Mora the Spider, Qualock, Willowstone, and the final boss, Shriek. Howl and Willowstone are more like mini-bosses if I'm being completely honest, but I think Mora, Shriek, and Qualock are the best fights out there. These fights also include escape levels at the beginning or in between stages. We'll talk more about escape levels in the next segment, but they're used pretty well in these boss fights. Overall, they're not flawless, but definitely a great addition to the game. So now it's finally time for the escape levels. Like I said, there are boss fights in the game that include escape levels, but they're only around half the length of the independent ones. There's 3 independent escape levels in this game: Watermill Escape, Avalanche Escape, and Ruins Escape. These are the best levels in the game in my opinion. The boss fights are cool, don't get me wrong, but with a game like Ori that focuses on platforming rather than combat, these levels just fit the game a lot better. These levels have amazing visual elements and sound elements as well. It's just an absolute blast to play these. They never get old. If I had to say which one was my favorite, I'd probably go with the Watermill Escape, as it's just the most beautiful atmosphere. There's so much to love about the escape levels in this game. It's now time to talk about my favorite part of Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and that's the game's soundtrack. If you watched my recent video game OST video, you know that this game has my favorite video game soundtrack of all time, and my reasoning was pretty simple. The game has the best atmospheric music and the best action music. Dashing and bashing, escaping the sandworm, amelioration, Mora the Spider. These moments of the game were so memorable because of the music. Video game soundtrack is my favorite part of video games, so the fact that this game has my favorite one so far, it means a lot to me. My favorite thing about this game's music is how it's all connected, because the use of motifs is absolutely perfected, further exemplifying the emotion and significance of the piece. We won't spend too much time on this segment, because if you want to hear everything I have to say about the soundtrack, you can go back and watch that video, link in the description. The soundtrack is just so beautiful. I've been playing video games for around 15 years now. I've never encountered a soundtrack that has spoken to me like this one. I'm not saying it's the best soundtrack of all time, I mean Super Mario Galaxy exists, but I'm saying it's my personal favorite, and I think it always will be. Now that that's out of the way, let's finally talk about the story. This goes without saying, but this segment includes massive spoilers as well. I know it's kind of weird we're doing the story really late into the video, but if I'm being honest, I almost forgot to include it. Not everybody will like Ori and the Will of the Wisps story, as there's not that much to it. It's pretty simple. Ori and his, best friend bird named Ku get trapped in a storm. They end up on an island called Nywin? I think that's how you say it. Basically, you and this bird get caught up in a storm and end up on opposite sides of an unknown island. The first half of the game involves trying to get back to Ku, and the later portions involve trying to awaken the spirit tree in order to bring the bird back to life. That's not all there is to it. You also meet this giant frog named Qualock who helps you along the way. Later on though, he gets a nasty parasite. You end up in an escape level which leads to a boss fight. You kick his ass and he manages to get free. Only problem is his wounds are fatal, and wow, that's actually kind of sad. The main antagonist in the game is this enormous bird called Shriek. She looks repulsing, honestly. She ends up being the final boss. You kill her until she dies from it. Then Ori sacrifices his current form to become a spirit tree himself. Yeah, that's right. He turns into a freaking tree. What an ending. In all seriousness, this story isn't that deep, but I think it does a great job on the emotional side. There's a lot of great moments throughout the game. So like I said, emotion was a huge part of what made Ori and the Will of the Wisps story entertaining. However, it's not just the story. Everywhere you look in this game, there's emotion. The orchestrated soundtrack is the most emotional music I've ever heard. The beautiful art style is full of emotion as well. Everything about this game is just romantic. I'll use this segment as a conclusion as well, because emotion is a great way to end one of the most emotional games I've ever played. Ori and the Will of the Wisps came out of nowhere for me. It introduced me to what modern side-scrollers can accomplish. It wasn't even 2 years ago when I played through this game, but I feel like it had such a huge effect on my appreciation for music, art, and the video game industry as a whole. And what really annoys me is it's not even that popular of a game. Like, go out in public and ask someone if they know what Ori and the Will of the Wisps is. You probably get pepper sprayed. Why does nobody talk about this game anymore? I understand it came out in an incredibly inconvenient time for the world, but this is seriously one of the best games of this decade so far. It's so full of art and love and beauty. It's it's a video game masterpiece, and it will always be close to my heart. Thanks for watching, everybody. Let me know what you love about Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and if you haven't played this game yet, I hope this video convinced you. That's it for today, and I'll talk to you again soon.